Morning everyone, welcome to today's webinar with Softcat, focusing on the future of education, getting the best of both. This is the second in a two-part series that we're doing around education and technology. We've got some great speakers today. James Seaman, our account chief technologist from Softcat, who works primarily with our public sector customers, and Alex Pearce, who is the CEO and founder of BFC Networks. Before we get started, I'd like to remind everyone that you can submit questions at any time during the webinar using the Q&A tool on the console, and then we'll go through these either during the webinar or at the end of the session. A recording of the webinar will be sent out to you, but if you've got any questions, please get in touch with your Softcat account manager or email marketing@softcat.com. I'll now pass you over to James, who's going to start the webinar.
Thank you very much, Laura. That was almost the worst time to sneeze then. Nearly did sneeze just as you were handing over. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. As Laura said, I'm an account chief technologist at Softcat. I work in our office of the CTO. Our Octo team, as we call it, is made up of a number of resources. We have chief technologists in all the areas, our priority areas for our customers, things like cybersecurity, a hybrid infrastructure, public cloud infrastructure, end user compute, cybersecurity. And we have account chief technologists, of which I'm one. And there's another two colleagues of mine in the same team, and we align ourselves to the customer. So our responsibility is to understand the customer need. Joining me today, I'm really pleased to introduce Alex, or I'll let Alex introduce himself, in fact. Alex Pearce is a partner of Softcat, so I've been lucky enough to work with Alex on a number of programs prior to joining Softcat as well. Alex, do you want to give the guys a quick introduction?
Yeah, cheers, James. So, yeah, great. Thanks to Softcat for letting me join and being able to kind of speak to you about what is an important subject at this moment in time. So, yeah, I started BFC Networks about 13, 14 years ago now, mainly working in the education space, and started in SharePoint, and now we're also all the way through to Microsoft 365. So it's a kind of a big subject area, as you can probably imagine at this moment in time. So hopefully, having worked with the DFE, with Microsoft, and helping deliver for some of this voucher scheme that's been available for remote learning, we can really get deep dive and talking about some of these important subjects.
Cheers, Alex. Also, I think you did talk yourself down there. You've been an MVP for almost every year that you've had the business running as well with Microsoft, haven't you? 13
years, yeah. So scary to think that this year is my 21st year of work. So last month I celebrated 20 years of working in IT. I know I don't look it. I know I'm going a bit more bulled up here, but yeah, 13 years MVP, 20 years in IT. So it's scary to think that I've at least got another 20 years worth of work to go.
Yeah, well, I won't say anything about how old you look. So today's agenda, as Laura said at the beginning, this is the second webinar in this. I think we can call it a series if there's two of them. And the first one, we covered the response to the coronavirus pandemic and the schools closing, and we had a speaker on from Henley College talking about how they have responded and what impact they've seen and the plans that they've made, and the outcomes that they've identified, actually, which was really interesting, certainly for me to see the customer view of that experience, because obviously Softcat and the response that we've had and the work that we've done with DFE and with Alex and our customers, we've seen very much one side of that story. So that was definitely useful from my perspective. And this webinar and this conversation is more around what we can take forward, what you guys can take forward, what opportunities are available to you to potentially adapt the way that your schools operate and the technology and how technology is consumed within your schools and organizations to enable potentially, I want to use the term better outcomes, but certainly more appropriate outcomes with the changing face of education and the likelihood of individual bubble-based or year group or class-based lockdowns, and in some cases potentially even school closures, whole school closures for a region, or just individual schools if there's outbreaks. But also, how do we apply that to business as usual as well? How do we use some of the things that we've learned from this to protect against things like snow days and so on and so forth? Less important, I understand. They're not as important as a pandemic and the response to a pandemic. So what does that mean for you guys? Well, it's the remote learning and the classroom experience. So being able to deliver education no matter where what the location is. The student interaction. So now suddenly you're going to have more channels and more capabilities to communicate with students and parents and also staff. The policies on what is expected of you guys, but also what that response needs to be nationally. Some schools, and again, speaking from just very minor experience with my partner being a primary school teacher, her school has a very specific response and they've advised teachers to do a very specific thing in certain circumstances, but I know that that's not the same across the board. The training, if we're going to be using technology and different technology and using it differently to how it's been consumed before, what skills gaps exist and how do we fulfill those, both ad hoc but also long term. And governing everything that we're doing, safeguarding, security. We don't want to create a cottage industry here. We don't want to add a load of complexity, but we also don't want to add a load of security holes. So what we do has to be appropriate, and what you guys do has to be appropriate. It can't be something that breaks the bank or breaks your operational processes or is too complicated to manage. As Laura said, you guys can submit questions at any time. We've got visibility of the question inbox, so if it's appropriate at the time, we'll stop and answer that question. If not, we'll leave some time at the end and pick up any ad hoc questions. So yeah, hopefully this agenda is on message. We're trying to take a very specific view, not necessarily just ambulance chase. We're not here to talk to you around any buzzwords. Obviously, things like blended learning and the flipped classroom experience, we are going to discuss, but we want to do it in a way that is consumable and tangible to your position and what you guys are trying to achieve. And just as a recap, I think with everything that has happened, I've sort of coined the phrase the great distance learning experiment, because I think 18 million children were sent home from school with relatively no notice at all. I think I remember conversations with my partner saying, don't worry, I don't think schools are going to close. The information we've been getting are that schools are going to stay open. 2 days later, the Prime Minister's saying full lockdown, schools are closed. And with very little notice, 18 million children, that's just in England, were sent home to start this experiment of remote learning, distance learning, hybrid learning, whatever you want to call it. All of the in-person instruction, over-the-shoulder help, the team projects, the social element of education, guided lessons, experiments in chemistry and science lessons, collaborative music lessons, all was replaced with video learning and subject matter being delivered through a VLE maybe once a day, maybe a couple of times a week, phone calls to parents, potentially even to students. Massive paradigm shift. Very, very complicated, probably very scary both for student, parent and teacher. And how to measure how successful that's been, I think is very, very difficult. There's going to be no definitive answers on what's worked well and what hasn't. There's going to be no definitive answers on the impact of the students necessarily that have been caught up in this. Although I'm sure we'll get some definitive answers if we ask any of the students that have been locked in their halls of residence for God knows how long. But all that information, all the data that we would need to create the analysis isn't available yet and won't be for some time. That doesn't mean we can stand still. I've used the term the Great Distance Learning Experiment. This experiment has now just been mandated in some legislation. So we now have the remote provision or the temporary continuity direction paper from DFE around what is now expected of schools and specific schools for remote learning, the expectation that remote learning will be available for an individual, a class, year group or entire school, and must be available in the event of an individual or a class or a year or a school being closed and remote learning being forced. It's no longer guidance. It's no longer an experiment. It's no longer a reaction. It's now, in inverted commas, legal. I didn't need to say it and do it then, did I? But it has changed the face of the challenge now. I think what was now tactical, what was seen as well, we'll do the best we can. We now have to do the best possible. And I think that in and of itself means that the challenge is much bigger. So what we want to talk to you guys today about, how do we, without the answers, without the analysis, how do we make this as strategic as possible? What technologies can you use in and around Microsoft for the purposes of this webinar? But there are other tools available and there are other solutions, VLEs, there's Google Classroom, and there's very similar solutions across the board. wanting to be fair, but what can we take forward? And we're going to focus on, if you like, on that Microsoft stack on this webinar. And I think, as I said, I think it's important to get the biggest amount of value and the biggest outcome that we possibly can for the students and for the organisations with the minimal impact. And I think because without having the data, that's the best measurement criteria we can give. So when we talk about best of both, what do we mean? So I've chucked some bullet points on here, and this isn't going to be death by PowerPoint by any stretch. But I think when we talk about flipped classrooms, when we talk about sharing content, we need to do something that is as simple as possible. We need to not create that cottage industry I referenced earlier. We need to make sure it's engaging. We need to be talking to people about the opportunity to do something different, not the impact or the change. Impact's change, that's negative. That's going to scare people. Emma, she's my partner, she's terrified of change, stresses her out. She knows her planning. She knows the job that she's going to do. Suddenly, when she's told she's then got to deliver content remotely, it's just another management overhead. How do we alleviate that? How do we make it good for the student, but also good for the teacher? That, again, comes in with that training and the upskilling, because this needs to be devolved to the people that are going to run it, that are going to do it, that are going to deliver that content, and also the people who are going to consume it. And we need to enrich all elements of learning. I'm not an academic. I'm not here to preach. I'm not a teacher, but I am a technologist, and I'm quite passionate about the public sector and what we can do in that space. And for me, it's around trying to help organisations who do have the knowledge, who are experts in teaching and academia, to take technology and deliver the best outcome they possibly can. That excites me, and it's about enriching that learning experience. And just focusing on the technology for a second, it can seem quite complicated. We're here to talk to you about Microsoft 365, Teams Classroom, and some of that functionality. To throw that in and make that a long-term strategic solution requires a lot of sort of tie-ins, a lot of integration, a lot of management support. When it breaks, how do you use it? How do I provision it? How do I get an account to a user? How do I govern it? Got safeguarding issues. Suddenly I've got to protect data and protect the student, and I'm speaking to them across video. So how does the student know when it's appropriate to use video and when it's not? What about chat services, messaging, social media, all of these really, really scary subjects? So how can we automate that? How can we simplify that? And that's where I'm really pleased that Alex is on the line. Alex has worked in this industry, as he said, for 13 years MVP at Microsoft. And has actually built a tool set around this. And it's important to understand the tool set Alex has got, but also why it exists and why he's built it and the work that he does. So when we talk about automating, when we talk about the IG, the compliance, the governance and the security and the provisioning of these services, Alex, what do you think are the biggest challenges that schools face, and what have you done and how have you tried to alleviate those pressures and make it as simple as possible?
I think when we kind of look at IT in general within a school, we obviously get technology, we get given it to us. So the Microsoft platform, as an example, is the same as what maybe a bank will get, what an insurance company would get, and then we can actually configure it, we can customize it. And that's great. It's great that it's a platform, it's not a solution, it's a platform for us to be able to do stuff. So one of the things that was important to us was scale. So we could scale with our customers, we could add a few customers, we could add 100 customers if we wanted to, and that's kind of where we built up a provisioning platform as such. But it was to be able to make the changes necessary to the platform to make it the solution. At the moment, if you go and take a Microsoft Teams environment, just by default, kids can chat one-to-one with each other. You won't have eyesight to the conversation, what's going on. Yeah, you can go and use the compliance center, you can go search for it, but we want to restrict that. Microsoft will add something to the platform that you then might want to restrict very quickly. And that's kind of where, when we kind of thought about what technology do we want to build, and we've built this about 5 years ago, what do we need to be able to do? And we need to keep up with the challenges of the ever-changing platform that Microsoft are providing with Teams, with its stream, with it being Flipgrid, whether it would be whatever it is. The challenge is always there to ensure that, one, we know what those changes are, but two, we're also keeping up with them to safeguard the platform for the teachers, the students, and then being able to have conversations together.
Yeah, you mentioned then around sort of that provisioning element as well. When we talk about provisioning, my head immediately goes to sort of school data sync, the student accounts, the staff accounts, and so on. That can be a task in and of itself, just to be able to provision those services. You talked around this platform, this solution being the same for insurance companies and banks. We at Softcat do a lot of migrations, if you like, of existing environments that reside within a data center in a customer's premise to the public cloud platform. M365 in education is exactly the same. that provisioning piece, that ability to be able to spin up those user accounts, manage those accounts, I think that's really important. And again, that's something that can be automated, and you guys automated. That's right, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, we've talked about kind of how the platforms are the same effectively, but there are education tools. So you've got something like School Data Sync, Microsoft School Data Sync. Some people just aren't aware of this as a product that's built into the education platform, but it's a way of you being able to put your data into School Data Sync from your timetable, and it goes off and provisions all your classes for you. It's an academic year aware product because your classes are academic year aware. You can update things, you can put it through there. So that's just kind of the classes environment. You still got to lock down the environment. You still got to do the policy side of things, but keeping on this kind of simplifying things effectively, we just want to be able to get you the classes. We want it to be in a simple way. You can just get on with teaching. You can just get on with supporting what needs to happen within the classroom, while the platform changes. We'll keep it updated for you, whether that's through School Data Sync, whether that's through the assignment features, that's through the OneNote class notebook, through Teams and Teams administration, as well as those Teams policies.
So you mentioned then some of the content channels that we can use in OneNote, and obviously there's the rest of the Microsoft suite. One of the things when you look at what we mean by, and I've tried to stay away from the industry buzzwords that everyone on this webinar will have heard, I'm sure, through multiple suppliers and big ISVs and people like Microsoft around blended learning and distance learning and remote learning and hybrid learning and all the things that are being bounced around in the market at the moment. But JISC have put some work in around defining what we mean by blended learning and what organizations can focus on. And one of them is around making that content accessible. Obviously, it needs to be engaging, and we'll come back to that in a second. But making content accessible. We know you mentioned Teams, you mentioned OneNote, but there's a whole suite of solutions that are available to both teacher and student, things like SharePoint. And again, that I always describe SharePoint as a solution looking for a problem. It can be quite complicated, but being able to automate the creation of SharePoint sites and the content that is within, and being able to govern that, I think is really important as well, both from a delivery of the content, but also from a governance and an IG and a compliance perspective. Is that something that you guys also focus on from your side of the fence, Alex, to try and simplify that process?
Yeah, so if we kind of think about the process that we want to get the teachers to be able to start using this technology, it needs to be a simple, easy way for them to get it. Now, yeah, it was all forced upon them, like you were saying earlier on, back in March time. But if you look at before that, kind of conversations we were having was kind of, well, what is the easiest way to be able to get teachers onto this platform to make it easy for them? Well, the beauty is we've got our Word, we've kind of got Word content, Excel content, PowerPoint content. That is all available and all can be viewed within the Teams client. That's important. They actually feel like they've already got a sense of ownership of it because their content is already there. And then actually the tools that are built into Teams from an education point of view mean actually they can just assign it to kids. It's really simple and really easy to do. And that's some of that beauty of the platform is it's really simple. I can just go off and do it. And putting my Microsoft hat on and kind of running a Microsoft company, that's the benefit of the Microsoft platform over the Google platform, is I haven't got to re-engineer how maybe I do my slides or my presentations or anything like that, because it's something I'm used to. I can just go in and go, oh, there's my class is already set up. It's already been set up with Teams. I can go on from that point of view. I don't have to worry about the safeguarding side of things because that's already been set up for me. So it really is kind of that easy stepping stone of being able to in there. So looking back at kind of what's happened since March and what the DFE kind of announced and helped us to support schools is kind of, well, look, here is a baseline configuration, and it was great to be part of setting up that kind of recommendation and recommending to partners what should be delivered around what those teams' policies should be, what the structure should look like to ensure that the safeguarding happens, and it happens across the whole platform for all of those schools should they want to be able to take that up.
No, I'll apologise now, Alex, because I did promise you no curveballs. But just as you were talking then around content, I have thought of a question that may come across a slight curveball to you, so apologies in advance. But what about the auditing of access? So when you talk about, well, I can see my class is already provisioned and you can share that content and you've got some degree of ownership of that. From a compliance perspective, if I wanted to know who's accessed what, and who's chatted to who, and whether if that is enabled, for example, is that auditing information available? Is that something that schools can get access to and report against as well?
Yes and no, but let me give you the context-wise. The reason is you've got to have a particular admin rights to be able to do that. So as long as you've got the admin rights to the compliancy centre and the Teams admin centre, yes, you can. And some of the beauty is that Microsoft are working on some of these technologies to make it easier for just a head teacher to be able to see what the rough activity is coming and what is going on within their teams. So yes, it's there. You've got the compliancy centre to be able to see what's going on, seeing how many minutes people are within calls and the hours that they spend on it. You can go and use to pull content through and be able to see what conversations are going on within two people. So absolutely the platform is there. It needs to be there from a GDPR point of view to ensure that actually they can see the data that's kind of going on. It's just looking at that technologies, and that's something that we kind of always thinking about is that these are the technologies that we can do. What can we do to actually go and delete that? So for example, one of the things that we're looking at adding to our provisioning engine is that every single night we go through, we'll pull out any offensive words that we find within Teams conversations and we'll delete them. Because that's actually safeguarding the platform, that's safeguarding the product, that's safeguarding the students and the teachers to make sure that's going on. And that's why, as I was saying, we're always looking, and that's the benefit of our cloud-based provisioning engine, is that we add that once and it is available to all our customers.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I think I'll tell Emma to stop swearing at her kids then, if you're going to start checking the environment. No, I'm joking. I think that safeguarding piece, the access, for example, the ability to look at who's done what. I think from a mental wellbeing perspective, from a students, I've talked there about engaging with staff and students and parents around that change and communicating what the opportunity that change is, but also engagement, long-term engagement, and understanding the how this may be impacting an individual. I think that to me is one of the biggest and most concerning scenarios, is that you have an individual that's in lockdown or self-isolation and the rest of their class aren't necessarily and are in school and school is open, or if you've got a small number of individuals, and using technology to be able to engage with those students that are at home and are isolating, either because they're directly not very well or members of the family aren't. I think that's really important. I think there's almost like a moral obligation there to make sure that we can engage and we can use technology like Teams and video calling and sharing of content and making sure that content's being accessible, is accessible and being accessed. I think it's really important. That audit piece, to be able to trigger a safeguarding and a well-being action for a student, I think is really important.
Absolutely. I'm sorry to interrupt, but the things that the teacher can do within Teams, and it's just to kind of bring those out, is that, yes, we recommend that chat should not happen, so there can't be a one-to-one chat between a teacher and a student, and that it should go on within a team, because then if another teacher gets added to that team, they can continue the conversation with additional teachers. Well, you can do that through a private channel within the team. Create a private channel, add a student into it, add the other teachers, and have that private conversation that's kind of going on. And if you also look at some of the development platform and applications that have been added to Teams, one of them from the very start was a bot called Polly. And Polly is just a way of being able to do questionnaires. How are you feeling today? And all of a sudden you get kids ticking how they're actually feeling. And then you maybe go off and go, actually, I noticed 3 or 4 of the kids are saying they're not feeling too good today, or they're struggling today. I'll create them a separate team and be like that. And that becomes that one-to-one relationship and ensuring that the student is feeling better and doing better in a way. And you're doing that from a virtual point of view rather than you're just seeing them looking a bit upset in the classroom.
So this is coming back to that point that the data is not readily available yet, because this is something we've run into at 200 miles an hour in response to the global pandemic. But moving forward, these are the data insights. These are the things that we can capture and profile. And when we talk about policy and process change, I think it's that type of interaction to me that's really important. And you're right, we are focusing on Microsoft. I do know that these capabilities exist elsewhere in other platforms as well, but it's how we do it, not necessarily the technology that we use. It's important that we do a bit of a deeper dive in the technology stack on this session around the Microsoft stuff. But I think that outcome is important, irrelevant of technology platform. And again, that being able to deliver it in the simplest possible way and being able to devolve that. So we've just thrown a lot of content there and a lot of conversation around some of the technologies and some of the capabilities of your engine, Alex, and what your business does, but also what Office 365 can do and Teams can do in some of the products. And I think for me, there's an empowerment element here around delivering the solution to teachers and to academics and to organisations, and giving them the ability to deliver what they need and use what they need and consume. And I think there is a training and a skills gap. Now, I know we've got Microsoft sort of education centre or educator centre, and there's, I think, the Me program and some of the content there, but it's not specific. What do you think the shortfalls are, the gaps? What do you think organisations, schools, teachers and IT functions within these schools can do to support teachers in around that training and skills gap? What are the steps you think that need to be taken?
Well, the first thing, and I get this question kind of, I'm an IT pro at a school, what specific training can I get to support me in an education role? And the most clear answer, or the shortest answer, is there isn't anything. There is stuff generally available for the IT pro. There is stuff for the educator. There is just nothing that sits in between that too, which is why the first thing I recommend is, look, you've got to go off and you've got to learn about what the teachers are doing inside the classroom, inside the lessons, inside of Teams. So go on off and have a look at the Me program, the Microsoft Innovative Educator program, look at the training that's available in there, learn of what it means to assign something to a kids, what a rubric is that's built into Microsoft Teams, the grade features, and learn kind of that side of things, learn the education side of it, and then go back and actually start looking at what's available from an IT pro point of view. So how do I, and I'm going to break this up into two pieces. There's the general learning of what the platform is. Mythbuster, many people don't realize, and you kind of, big question is, say, oh, you've got to look after your Azure AD, and they go, well, I haven't got Azure AD, I've got Office 365. Well, you have got Azure AD because that's your first layer of authentication into the platform. So kind of looking at what the platform is, what the technologies are, and how they work together, looking at things like the Microsoft 365 administration, kind of there's the general Microsoft training one. So these are the administration ones. Don't worry too much about the Azure side of stuff, the fundamentals for Microsoft 365, and kind of build up that kind of understanding of this is what the platform does. And then actually kind of going, well, actually, how does School Data Sync fit into this? Well, School Data Sync makes Teams. Okay, well, I've learned about Teams and I understand how a classroom team is. So I know actually I've got a bit more knowledge about School Data Sync. I understand Teams. I understand the education context about it. And that's kind of where you've got that holistic view of the things that are going on. And that's great as a here and now, but the platform is always changing. And this is kind of another key thing which is important to keep an eye on is what are those changes? So if you look at something like O365 updates as a Twitter handler, that's a friend of mine and I set this up as an automated thing that will go through the roadmap for Microsoft, pull through all the changes, and then tweet them, just so you've got an update of kind of the things that are going on and the changes that are happening within the platform. And I mean the whole platform. Yeah, it talks about the education one there, but also all those other things as well that are going on there. So it's a great way to understand the kind of things that are changing. Keep an eye on the admin center. They're always announcing what's kind of going on and the changes are there. And then the other key one to keep an eye on is something like user voice. If you've not heard of user voice is Microsoft's way of being able to hear back your feedback about changes that are going on and what you would like. So you can go in and see a change and you can upvote it. So, and there are ones for almost every product, ranging from education to Teams to SharePoint and OneDrive to Xbox and Minecraft, if you really want to be giving feedback there. But it's a way that you can give that feedback back. But the key thing is Microsoft go in there, they evaluate it as a product team, and then they say, we're working on that. We've built that. We've delivered that. And that gives more information than necessarily what the roadmap does. So actually you can see what's coming along, what those changes are. So if you've got a teacher that comes and said, I really need to be able to do this, I said, right, I'll get this logged with Microsoft. You can send them a link. You look like you're a good hero, and you get them to help voting it up, and they can keep an eye on it and see these features that are being added all the time.
No, that's really good insight, and your approach right at the beginning really resonates with certainly with me, but I think with Softcat and the way that we try and support our accounts, it's around understanding that classroom journey, understanding the teaching journey, and what the actual teachers want to do, and structuring things around that. Understand the business outcome, for want of a better term, the educational outcome, and then map your training needs and how you want to consume that technology based on that. I think that's really, really important. That's certainly our approach, and it was nice to hear. Obviously, you sort of resonate that message as well. I think there's lots of partner opportunities around being able to provide that relevant training. I know we can do that. You've probably got an approach as well, Alex. I think that important bit is it needs to be measurable, it needs to be beneficial to the organisation, and therefore there isn't one size fits all. It needs to be something that works for the school and for how you want to work. For example, you may already have a VLE, so there may be elements of Teams and the M365 suite that you're not going to use because you've got a VLE, but how do we integrate that? So your training needs are going to be very different to a school that just goes in with both feet and said, right, we're going full fat. Teams classroom and everything that goes with that. So I think mapping that training need to the school, there's the tactical and there's the strategic, but it needs to be based on what is important to that school. I was talking around some of the definitions that JISC have pulled together around what we mean by blended learning. And in that what you can do element, there's the make your content accessible, which we've discussed, there's SharePoint, there's Teams, and there's the classes that exist within that platform. I think making the content engaging and changing that content slightly. So she hates it because I keep talking about it, but Emma does a lot of her planning and a lot of her teaching for the school that she works at in PowerPoint. That content has had to have been adapted and changed because in certain circumstances in sort of remote learning, Emma's not stood at the front necessarily delivering that content. So it's suddenly become a bit more detailed. There's suddenly become a lot more notes and a lot more content in the slides and in the collateral that she's sharing. So that needs to stay engaging, and that needs to be consumable by the age group that it's being delivered to and potentially the parent as well. And this is that flipped classroom sort of concept. What do we do remotely, and what therefore do we use a group classroom experience for? Is it to review that content or to work collaboratively on something? Can't speak today. And that presentation style needs to change. And to support the content, the delivery mechanism, the presentation style, that needs to be adapted so that it works both in a classroom and remotely. The use of collaboration tools, I think, is really key. So there's videos on YouTube of teachers in the UK and in America, Teams calling a class of kids and doing something interactive, which is fantastic. There's also that one-to-one capability to be able to speak directly to the parent and or student at the same time remotely. And then there's a mix between the two when you've got a group of kids that are potentially isolating and some that are in school. And we need to think, and you guys need to think about how you're going to use tools like Teams. It could be Hangouts and Google Meeting or Zoom or whatever, but whatever the technology platform, and how do we use the collaboration tool effectively? How do we make sure that it also remains secure and it's auditable and it meets all the compliance? And that within the Microsoft suite and using tools like Alex has with the Provisio engine, that can be governed and automated centrally. And even if it can't be, even if you are using a third-party solution, we need to think about how that is going to be managed and what you're going to get out of it. But I think those three or four elements are really important when we think about this blended experience. We need to make that content accessible using the technology platforms that in this case, we're talking Teams and Teams Classroom. We need to make sure that content is engaging and therefore that presentation style is adjusted. To keep that engaging, but also use the collaboration tools, I think, to bridge that gap on the remote element of this, and get the learners involved. This has gone from being an experiment and a quick schools are closed to being something we can forecast. There's lots of conversations around whether half term is going to be increased by 2 weeks. There's conversations around Wales having a potentially another national lockdown, and even England having either large regional lockdowns or another national lockdown. So we can start planning. We can start thinking about what we're going to do. What does that flipped classroom experience mean in both class, remote, together, or one or the other? By coming together and thinking how we can use the tools, Alex just used that term around that sort of user-driven exchange with Microsoft around the development. But there's also an opportunity to influence policy, and I know I might be getting on my soapbox a bit, but to think about how we and collectively how the education sector can influence policy and influence what is good and what good looks like, because there is an inertia in public sector and some of the verticals in the public sector around this is the way we've always done it. And the pandemic has broken that to a degree. So what can we take forward to make that be, this is how we've always done it, to make that be the new way of things being done? And what can benefit everyone and every school and every institution. And the more we explore this and the more people push this, I think the more likely it will be that that policy and policies can be influenced. We must also remember that remote learning and blended learning and distance learning, or whatever you want to call it, was in use prior to the pandemic. The pandemic hasn't made us do something that we couldn't do before. And in a lot of cases, it was in use, and in a lot of cases, it could have been used badly. I think what matters now is that we understand how it is implemented is what makes it successful or not, and how it meets the need of the school, the institution, the student, the parent and the teacher. That is how we measure this and how we understand whether it's successful. And there will always be elements of nuance for each organisation, each class, potentially year group, even individual. And these tools allow you to have that level of customization. You don't have to say that tick box, that setting, that policy is for everyone nationally, everyone in the school, everyone in this year group. You can customize where it's appropriate to do so. And one thing that I did some reading over the weekend in preparation for this webinar, and one thing that jumped out at me was remote learning has never been pushed for by parents. I don't think, again, not qualified, don't have any kids running around, but not that I know of. But I don't think any parents ever said, do you know what I want? I want my child to be at home more and I want to be teaching them. I think the remote learning element has been a response to schools being closed. However, parents may not have asked for remote learning, may have not wanted their children to be at home 5 days a week for 6 months, or 1 day a week, or whatever may happen in the future. But that greater contact, that greater understanding of teaching, in many cases has lifted the lid, and parents are now asking questions. Well, I've got 2 hours worth of content, but what else did my child do or my kids do at school for the other 6 hours that they were there? What are they now missing out on? What social areas are they not necessarily engaging on? What well-being activities? What, other than just learning how to add, subtract, divide, doing English or science lessons, what other aspects of education are they missing out on? What's important and what isn't? And that deeper engagement with parents can only be, in my opinion, a good thing. And what can we learn from that, and how can we take that forward? Obviously, there's the safeguarding and there's the security and all the other stuff around that, I suppose, with additional comms to parents and involving students and so on. But this exercise, a lot of parents have gained a deeper understanding and potentially even appreciation of what teachers do and what schools do. And I think we need to build on that. And then I used the point earlier around enriching the wider experience. That's around content. That's around some of the use of technologies. So we could go. I could sit here and talk to you for the next 45 minutes about HoloLens. It's not really going to work in a primary school, but there are other technologies that we can integrate. I think you used Flipboard as an example, Alex. Flipgrid, that's the one. There's other technologies that integrate with Google and Microsoft and some of the other suites that are out there, and they can enrich the experience. But we can also enrich the BAU, the business as usual activity of schools. I used the term snow days earlier. I remember when I was a kid, I think we had 3 days off must have been primary school, but because the heating broke in the school. But we're in a position now with technology and the response to coronavirus and some of the things that have now been legislated around that remote learning, the capability that schools must have, and that's an important term, must have, that can enrich business as usual activities, so that snow days may actually become a thing of the past in being a lost school day. I don't think the kids will thank you for that. They won't be able to build as many snowmen. But that temporary closure, that temporary capability to do things remotely could come in handy. It could change school trips. It could change revision time for children. There's lots and lots of use cases that we could apply this type of technology and this process to in normal BAU terms for schools. And I think that's really, really important. And a quote from doing some reading around how this has impacted education globally was that one of the leaders of a large school group in the States, Madeline Fry, used the term, "A hope that we go back to normal is crazy, is nothing but crazy," I think is what she said. And that was around actually understanding that there are some positives in the use of technology and distance learning and remote learning that can have a factor in classroom and remote and the normal day-to-day cycle of education. Now, obviously, that's from the States, but I think they're using the same technology. They're teaching the kids of the same age group. They might be teaching a different syllabus, but I think the point still stands. And it's something I definitely support in that this isn't around achieving a route back to normal. This is around achieving something that's better and taking what we can from what's been an absolute nightmare time. I feel I've talked everyone to death there, but I mean, Alex, is there anything that you can talk of positive things that you've seen? So success stories, maybe some failures, certainly from the DFE program.
Yeah, so let me give you two really. The first is 2 or 3 schools actually who had a device strategy before the pandemic. So we're talking pre-March. The kids had devices. I'm talking both public and state schools. They had Office 365 in place. They had Intune to manage the devices. They had their team set up. They went and got everybody sent home at the beginning of March, and they continued their lesson straight away because all the technology was already there. They'd already taken that step forward with the digital transformation, as it was previously termed, digital transformation in the education sector. They had done that, and actually the kids continue to work. And it would be interesting to see how they have compared to kids, because that education has continued where full 1, 2 necessarily haven't. And that's also down to the attitude towards education as well for the kids and for the parents to ensure that the kids have gone home, but they've continued the lessons that are there. From a success story since, it's great to see that some of these schools that didn't have a remote learning environment have now set that up. Due to the pandemic, they've taken opportunity from the government to take advantage of this voucher scheme, has set up teams. They have set up a way of being able to communicate not just to the students and to that, but they've also thought, how do I communicate to the parents? I used to live on a school with on a road with a secondary school on it, and I just followed it because it was a brand new school. Nice to see the building going up, but the head teacher does weekly Facebook Live opportunities to talk to the parents. It's just a great way of using technology and be able to engage with the parents, because you can't have them in, but you can definitely engage with them and you can still chat to them. And I think those are some of those where they've really thought outside of the box, really gone, right, how do I communicate? What do I need to communicate? Both from all those stakeholders, to the students, to the teachers at home, to the parents, and how can I actually bring together like a virtual online parents' evening? So the kids actually are still getting that same feedback, the parents are getting the same feedback, and that education can continue, yes, not in the normal way, but in a new digital way and moving forward. And I think this is our opportunity to move forward in a great new way that technology supports, and also supports people's lifestyles. A lot of people do work more on their mobile phones. So I've got my device here, I've got an iPad here, I've got 2 monitors here, I've got a laptop here. That's how I work. Going and seeing somebody is something that's always easy for me to do. But if I can get a quick 3-minute update on how the school's doing on my mobile device, that's great. I can do that wherever I am.
Yeah, and that democratization of data and service is something that's big in the public sector. If you think of healthcare and local authority, there's no reason why that shouldn't exist with the education journey of your child and your interaction with the schools. I completely agree. I'm just conscious of time. I think there's a couple of points I wanted to cover. Obviously, this is the second webinar in a series. There's 2 of them, and they're both available online. This will be available shortly after we close down in a few minutes. Hopefully, if there's any more questions coming in, we'll pick those up as well. But there's a lot of enabling technologies that support the use of this type of solution, this type of platform, as you called it, Alex, correctly. You're right, it is a platform. So there's connectivity, and there's all the other things that go with being able to consume this solution safely and securely, but also in a successful manner. I'm thinking connectivity, bandwidth, all that sort of good stuff.
Now, I was going to say, it's not just Office 365. You're right. I thought about this earlier on. It's not just about, it's about making sure your network is up to date to do it. Can you actually provide, with a teacher sat with 29 kids in them, can they actually do that one stream to the kid who's actually unfortunately got to stay at home to be able to do it? Do we dedicate our internet line to 80% Microsoft Teams and 20% everything else to ensure that we have got that enriched thing? And these are the kind of things that we need to be thinking about to support Teams and the education thing that's going on within the platform.
Completely agree. Completely agree. And going off topic slightly from the webinar, we as Softcat support a number of organisations. We have a multi-academy trust and independent schools group and a leadership committee where we help and advise and in some cases chair sessions for that group. And some of the talking points in that group and some of the next meetings and sessions that we're going to be having will be around that. Will be around that enabling technology. Someone asked in that group around this type of technology use in that setting for assemblies and parents' evening and prospective student evenings as well, so where people want to look around the school and choose whether the child's going to go there or not. How do we do that without it disconnecting every 5 minutes, or jitter, or poor quality video, or poor quality content, or poor quality audio? And these are all supporting infrastructure, foundational things that are needed to be able to use this stuff. So we will be discussing those, and there'll be I'm not necessarily sure it'll be a separate series of webinars, but there's content available for that. Just very conscious of time now, because I know we're about to close. We did have one comment in from Helen around the Insights app. I believe that's probably around the audit and the reporting capability, Alex, but I'll defer to you.
That's back to in the Teams, you've got this Insights app. I'm not 100% sure if it's come out of beta yet or in a kind of a testing environment, but certainly that's something that you're going to get built into the classroom side of Teams. And there's a whole governance conversation around how you use Teams. There's admin Teams, there's classroom Teams, how they can be used, all that kind of stuff. But Insights is kind of the future I talked about, how you'll be able to soon be able to see more about who's interacting. The head teacher will be able to see what's going on with classes. The Insights app is what does and enables that to happen.
Yeah, no, I'm certainly getting emails from it telling me that I've been sat in
that's something slightly different. That's something that's kind of built into the platform for everybody, saying you spent too many hours in minutes, or these are your things, and Cortana's telling you to. This is actual insights about how kids are using the platform within it for the actual classes rather than just normal Teams.
No, thank you for that. I think there's not been any more questions coming. As I said earlier, this is the second of a two-part set of webinars. The first is already available at the link that's on that slide on screen now. I'd just like to take this opportunity to thank everyone for taking the time to come in. Hopefully, we've delivered a few nuggets of information there, or at least sparked some thoughts. If you do have any questions that you haven't posted in the Q&A, or you think of anything later, please contact Softcat via your account managers, and they will endeavour to either put you in contact with myself or Alex, or get that question answered for you where appropriate. Alex, thank you very much for joining this webinar, and I will leave it there.
Cheers, James. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Cheers, guys.
Just a quick reminder, so as James said, thanks so much to everyone that joined today. There will be a recording of this available for you and sent out to your email address. But as James said, if you've got any questions, please speak to your account manager, or you can contact us on marketing@softcat.com if you need that as well. Thanks, everybody. You can now leave the webinar.